Hi, everybody. Today we have Veronica Reilly, who is an incredible woman. She is currently raising her 2 grandsons with her ex-husband, Bill. So if that's not enough of a hook to get you listening, I don't know what will be. How'd you feel about this episode?
Well, I feel like you and I had some insider information, so we knew enough of the story, the testimony, to know that it was going to be powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But I cannot believe the depth of the story. And it was even more impactful than I anticipated.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So would you read the first line
of
Veronica's speech?
Yes. Okay, so Veronica spoke at our Impact event earlier in the year. It's like our biggest fundraising event of the year, and she was one of our core stories.
Mm-hmm.
So the first line, it's such a mic drop. She said, "If you had told me 10 years ago that I'd be raising my 2 grandsons with my ex-husband, I would have said that you were crazy." And by that point, everyone's just locked in. So definitely listen to this episode. Listen all the way through because she has got some golden wisdom, some golden insight, and it'll be worth it for sure. So we hope you enjoy. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mended Futures Podcast. Today we have Veronica Reilly with us. Veronica has been very generous with her story. She actually spoke at our Impact event this last year, just kind of sharing her experience with raising her grandsons with her ex-husband and her experience with our kinship care program. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm. Good morning. Good morning. We haven't said this to you before, but
My gosh.
When we were preparing for the Impact event, we were kind of timing out the stories as a committee. And I forget who read your story, but after, it wasn't even you reading it and just the words that you put on the page, Allison had to take a break. She was crying. Yeah.
I wept.
Everyone had at least tears in their eyes. It was powerful.
Right. So who is Bill and why is this a very atypical kinship placement?
So I had 2 girls. They were 3 and 1 when I met Bill. I was not married, and he became my girl's dad. My girls were 5 and 3 when I moved to Lynchburg, and 6 and 4 when we got married, and 7 and 5 when our son was born. Even when Bill and I divorced in 2000, it took us, my mom told me that I needed to find a man who was financially stable and my kids needed a dad. And I went out and I found him. Bill is a wonderful man. And he was my kid's dad, even when we were divorced. We worked things out. We co-parented. It took us a while. Anybody who goes through a divorce, it's bumpy, it's ugly, but we worked it out. And through the years, it was always dad and Veronica, or, mom and dad. And we just worked things out. We worked through our own issues. And when we got the call that the boys needed to be placed, we didn't think twice. Even though we'd been divorced for so many years, we knew that those kids needed us. And maybe we needed them. And we didn't hesitate. I literally moved from my home in Roanoke to Forest in hours. And I always say that I moved in with my ex-husband, but my ex-husband had his ex-wife and his grandchildren move in. We had his wife was quiet. Our daughter, who lives in Stanton but would come to Lynchburg for work, would stay at his house. So he was able to go visit his brothers, and it was just a different life. Mine was different. I worked a lot. He was retired. So Bill is my ex-husband. And we have worked hard at just co-parenting these children. It's not easy. We've had our bumps. They've been ugly at times. But these boys unify us in a way that I still to this day is nothing short of a miracle.
It's amazing.
And for me, it's nothing but Jesus. I don't know what gets him through, but he has. I always tell people I'm married, but I'm not. But I'm a mom, but I'm not, because they're not my kids, they're my grandkids. He's not my husband, but how do you date when you're living with your ex-husband raising grandchildren? Not that I have any time to date. I don't have time for anything, It's them. They require so much, and they need so much, and they deserve that. These children need to know that they are loved. Not just a physical need, an emotional need. So Bill and I hopefully give that to them. So that's who Bill is. Bill is a wonderful man who has taken on this responsibility. He's amazing.
Did you always co-parent well together? Like when you first got divorced, did it take some time to get into a rhythm?
It did. I think when the girls were, they would have been maybe 12 and 10, 13 and 11, and they were like maybe grounded at my house, but not grounded at Bill's, and they were typical divorced kids pitting us against each other. And we got together and said, this can't happen. So if they were grounded at my house, they were grounded at Dad's. And it started out when our son started doing football. And I had gotten remarried to David, and he was a truck driver, so he wasn't around a lot. So Bill and I would go to cheerleading events, swimming events, marching band events, football. And a good friend of mine to this day, our children played football together. And, she'd roll up and talk to Bill. And then one time they played at the JF high school, and Bill was there, but also my second husband, David, who has since passed away, showed up, and she's like, who's that? I said, that's my husband. She's like, who's that? And I said, that's Bill. She said, your ex-husband? How can you sit there with him? I'm like, how could I not? He's their dad. So it was very unusual, even back then, that we would travel together for all these different events that our kids were in. But we're like, they're our kids.
I feel like you could teach a class on co-parenting, even if you hadn't had a class on co-parenting, where it just organically happened for you. And some of the things you're sharing, I'm in my 40s. I would imagine you're not. But when you watch people have children and there are divorces, you have to understand that if you're both going to be in the children's lives, you're going to be at sporting events, and you're going to be at school plays, and you're going to be at birthday parties. And it's not easy. I'm sure it's
rubbing
not
shoulders,
easy. But you are going to have a relationship with whomever you share children with for a very long time.
And then you have weddings and grandchildren. And then, so it took us a while, but we realized we had to put our own needs aside. And it was, in the beginning, we had to talk through email way before, texting. We could not talk in person. It was ugly. But we finally just slowly,
for the kids.
And put the kids first.
Were you passionate about kids before you had your own? Because I feel like all of these things, it seems obvious, but so many people don't have that same mindset of, we do it for the kids. We have to figure it out.
It's natural to you, but I don't think that co-parenting was natural in the time period that you're talking about.
Right. I don't even think co-parenting was a thing. And now you have a whole Reddit thread on co-parenting and all the things that come from that. My mother had so many children, so I was raised with kids. And then my oldest niece was born, and she was 14 when I was 14 when she was born. And I went to live with my sister that summer, and I was her caretaker. So always loved kids. When I became a single mother and moved from New York to Virginia, before I met Bill, I had my own daycare, and I wanted to stay home with my kids. And then when Bill and I got married and I moved up here, I worked at J. Crew so I could work at night and stay home with the kids during the day, and then Bill would keep the kids at night. So, and I want to say I did wonderful things with my kids, but my own mental illness, my own addictions, there were things that were done that were terrible. But I have worked hard so I don't want people to hear, oh, she's done this. I am not a perfect person. I've made huge mistakes. And my kids, if you invited them in, they would say those things. And I'm like, I did that. But here I am now trying to change who I am so I could be a better person for these kids, be a better person for myself so I could live with myself.
It's beautiful.
As you learn trauma-informed parenting skills, how did it impact your perspective on your own childhood?
So I was actually going over the questions myself in my head this morning, and while my childhood was dysfunctional, it wasn't full of drugs or alcohol or abuse. It was just my parents had 8 kids in 10 years, and they were just very young and not trauma-informed themselves. So I have done a lot of in-depth thinking on my own trauma from my childhood because I'm an addict. I'm 8 years clean.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Addicted to pain meds 10 years ago after a car accident and some neck surgeries. So I think that when I got the boys, I was more aware of trauma-informed parenting than a lot of people. And in my career working at the rescue mission, we took a lot of trauma-informed classes on what that looks like. So I feel that all of that led me to where I am today, raising my grandchildren who sadly had to come from that trauma. So I think it prepared me in a way more than I ever thought I would have. And my former sponsor, but now my co-leader at the jail ministry where I met Jesus in jail 9 years ago, she said that my whole life has led up to where I am now and what I'm doing for the boys. And so being trauma informed and taking more parenting classes from Patrick Henry, or I'm sorry, 518 now.
It's okay. You can mention.
So much. And just the classes, and I'm going to take more classes and just constantly learning and how to meet the needs of these boys so we can break that generational curse and don't want those cycles to go into their adulthood or even in their childhood. That's what I'd like to see happen. So the curses that my parents had and I've had and my grandchildren now, and just stop it.
That's so powerful.
You're so resilient, truly.
Well, some days we don't feel that way.
Yeah. I feel like that's the mark of a true resilient person, though, is being able to be honest about the toughest days and everything in between. Yeah.
People need to hear that you can survive. If others can do it. I don't want to get into my testimony about my drug addiction, but there was something I did that was truly terrible to my child. And I was, during the pandemic, working at the rescue mission. All the meetings shut down before they started doing the online things. And I had this great loft, and I had a great job, and I was a lot skinnier, and I had a motorcycle, and life was just different. And I was successful. But a woman was in my class. I started doing Celebrate Recovery, which is a Christ-based 12-step program. And she looked at me, she said, "There's no way you've done the things I've done." And I said, "Well, let me tell you something." So they said, "You're only as sick as your secrets." And I had shared it with a few people. Of course, my family knew, but not people outside of my small circle. And God said, "Tell your story." And I did. And she looked at me and I said, "I did that." And that's how far I've come. So people need to hear this, that you can survive. That's why I'm so open to sharing my story, because people need to hear that you can survive. You can walk through fire and come out the other side and be stronger for it.
And also, it can happen to you.
It can happen.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to be mindful of addiction could happen to us.
Anybody.
Financial ruin could happen to us. Divorce could happen to us. So that's important as well.
I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned from even working here and being exposed to people's stories, is that so much of the time, the things that separate children from their families are outside of any of their control.
Right.
And the need for a support system is just unmatched.
So as you've learned more about trauma-informed parenting, when you look back at your own childhood, what are some of the things that your family could have benefited from that you now have in your toolbox?
To tell us that we were loved, that no matter what we did, even if we were doing the wrong thing, that it was okay, and that you'll learn from this. Something that I came out of my own childhood was not to tell my own children that they're bad, that they're naughty. And because that's a negative connotation that you never want to put in a child's head, because they already think they're bad because mommy and daddy don't live with them, or they don't live with mommy and daddy. And you always hear about divorced children. Well, are we to blame for mommy and daddy getting divorced? I'm not loved. I never want my grandchildren to not feel that. So my mother was in her 60s, maybe late 60s, before she told me she loved me. My dad he was being helicoptered from hospital in New York City for, he had a massive heart attack, and that's the first. He was in his 50s. So I never wanted my children to not know I didn't love them. That's the biggest thing I took from my childhood, was to let my kids know that it's okay to make a mistake, and for them to hear me admit when I made a mistake, and to feel loved, and to never go to bed angry, never end a conversation with angry words, even if we walk away still having some issues. We always say, I love you. And I say that to my grandchildren. And now that my 4-year-old or almost 4-year-old grandson is now saying I love you back because he, developmentally delayed. But to hear those words is powerful.
Yeah.
Right? So those are the big things I took away from my childhood.
I think that is really special that you were able to see that on your own, taking the fact that your parents were very open with saying, I love you, and just kind of knowing inherently that that's not what you wanted your family to be like. I think it's very common for people to kind of continue those generational traumas and curses and not even noticing that saying I love you is a normal thing in most homes. Is there a point that, was it something that you always noticed that I love you wasn't said around your home, or was there a specific point where you're like, oh, that was different for my family?
I grew up in a big family. There were 7 of us. My mother lost one between myself and my younger sister. And I don't think they knew how to express their emotions. They were born in the 30s, in the middle of the Depression. So they grew up with, so many things. And my maternal grandfather was an alcoholic, and he died in his 50s. And my maternal grandmother they called it manic depressive back then, but bipolar. So we've got a lot of that in our family. And I believe all of us have it to a degree in my family. And I think that may be part of what sent me off spinning out of control when I got into the pain pills and the issues. But when it comes back to, I never want to blame my parents. I don't put any blame on them. I stand here today saying they did the best they could. And I'm sure my kids can come in and say, I know I've made mistakes, even to this day. And even as a mom growing up and then making the mistakes I've made, but I always wanted to know and let my children know that they were loved. And I hope I did that.
That's a perfect example of when you know better, you do better. And I think generationally, when you think about the Depression, I'm a former history teacher, that was about survival. So you're thinking about thriving in parenthood. And oftentimes parents back then were thinking about, is my child going to survive? Are we going to have enough food on the table? So I think as a culture, when we know better, we do better.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what you can do, is learn from your past and try to do better.
Fail forward.
Yeah,
right.
I love that.
It's funny that you mentioned surviving. When this first happened, we got the boys almost 3 years ago, we were in survival mode. And I think even to this day, we're still in survival mode, but we want to move from survive to thrive. And I think some days we do thrive, and we have those great mornings where there's no meltdowns, but they're kids, and they're almost 4 and 6, and they will have their moments, as any typical kids are.
Absolutely.
And I'm trying to learn what the difference is from trauma and normal childhood. And that's why I want to go back and take more classes, and I've been considering going back to school for something like this.
Cool.
At my age, I don't know if I'll ever use it, but I could use it here in my brain.
You can always use it.
You're using it as a parent.
Right.
And I think that you're trying to win the day as a parent. When we think 6 months out or we think a year at a time, it's hard to win every single day or for a long period of time. But if you're just winning the morning,
a win is a win is a win.
Yes, let's just have a great morning.
Right. We tell the 6-year-old that even if you had a meltdown, that you could just take a deep breath and you could reset your day anytime.
Right.
And if it's at the end of the day, then tomorrow's a better day.
Mm-hmm.
So we learn that.
Mm-hmm.
We have to learn how to reset and regulate our emotions in our 60s and 70s, because we're in our own, survivor,
Right.
What's the word?
Survival mode.
Fight or
flight, yeah.
And in the that's another question you'll have for me about the fight or flight and how we got here.
Right.
We try every day, just it's, one day at a time.
And I think just from the little bit of the testimony that you've shared so far this morning, you are an example of someone who has reset their
Absolutely.
life multiple times. But recovering from addiction, that's a hard reset.
Yeah.
It was quite a challenge. Still is.
Mm-hmm.
I am due to have a knee replacement. As soon as I total knee replacement, I have to lose some weight first. But worrying about what the pain is like and having pain pills to take and what that looks like and what that fear is for me. And I know that I need to anchor myself in Jesus and take that again one day at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've got a plan in motion, but that's a big fear, is to relapse. And I've had dreams that I've made mistakes and I'll end up back in jail and I'll lose everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you can always reset yourself, but there comes a point in your family or your friends where they're done.
Mm-hmm.
They can't forgive you again and they never want to go back to that life.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And the boys are my focus and they're my ministry.
Yes.
And I want them to know about Jesus and learn that life can be okay no matter what you do. Make mistakes, you get up. I talk to Birdie all the time. Sorry, should we say names? I talk to my grandson
go
all the
for it.
time. That it's okay to make a mistake. And if you fall down, you get back up again. That is what makes you the person who you can be.
Life is messy, and sometimes people just need someone safe to talk to. We're here to listen because everyone's story should be heard. 518 Counseling exists to empower children, adults, and families to overcome past experiences and create a path to being stronger both mentally and spiritually. Family is a nuanced concept. 518's family care team brings simple solutions to complex situations through professional intervention, interpersonal support, and parenting education. We strive for an outcome of mending families and keeping children safe. 518's Connect team equips and empowers volunteers with the training and support to serve confidently by matching their passions with opportunities. Our outreach is targeted to build partnerships with individuals, churches, agencies, and businesses. At Hat Creek Camp, we provide exceptional camp experiences with careful attention to the needs of youth, encouraging campers to grow through trust-based challenges and successes. It's a place to build relationships, inspire change, and transform lives. I want to talk about when you first started co-parenting with the boys. It struck me that you said they had signs of trauma so early on. You said they were 3 and 1 when you...
They were... Birdie was 3.5, and Jamie had just turned 1 that October, and we got them early December, so they were babies.
Wow. Yeah. So what were, if you're comfortable sharing, what were some of the things that stuck out to you as, oh, this is different parenting these kids?
So Brody has emotional challenges and anger challenges because he remembers living with mommy and daddy.
Okay.
And
as a 3-year-old. So I think that's really important for people to understand that as a 3-year-old, he has memories or something is ingrained in the fiber of his being.
That he lived with mommy and daddy. And he, even when we first got the boys and we'd have to drive through Windhurst to get to another place, he'd say, Mommy and Daddy used to live there.
Wow.
So he, even now, will talk about him living here.
Mm-hmm.
But he remembers before and after. And that's huge for him because he remembers how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And instinctively, kids know that they should be with their parents. But instinctively, they also know that they need to have a safe place. And right now, we are their safe place. And where my daughter and her husband are working hard to do what they need to do, they are still with us. And as they see their parents and their seeing different things on that side of the family, and they come home and they still want to go home with mommy and daddy, but they still have to stay with us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's trauma in itself. And we have to stick to the core order, and we have to do what's best for the kids. And those are hard choices. And if my daughter or her husband hear this podcast, that's not easy for me to say. I would love to, here you go, have your kids back. But I think they both know that they have to work on themselves more, and they're not ready yet.
Mm-hmm.
And until that time, Bill and I will be here. And we feel like this is it for us. Long term, this is it. That we will have them for, if they go back, that's great. If they don't, then we're here. That's up to God and the courts.
And I think the power of the Patrick Henry to 518 rebrand is what 518 means. So the verse is about reconciliation. And you just talked around reconciliation. So, have you and Bill prepared your hearts for reconciliation if the boys go back with your daughter and her husband? Like, what does that look like? Is that the ultimate goal?
That would be the ideal goal. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's realistic at this time, but that would be, reconciliation is always something you want for everybody, but that may not always be the best thing at this time. So Bill and I talked about it. I live in his house. I gave up my apartment. I changed jobs. Our whole trajectory of our lives have changed. So would I still live with Bill as grandma and grandpa? Hopefully, God willing, if the boys go back, they still let us see them. That's a big fear, is that they would shut the boys out of our lives, because there's a lot of anger and bitterness on both sides. Our lives have changed for, many reasons.
Right.
And we've lost a lot of things, but we've gained so many things. And my daughter has missed raising her children for almost 3 years. I can't imagine her pain. And we're in a new season of talking. And I spoke with her this morning. I didn't tell her, I just had an appointment. But she has trauma from her childhood. Whether it's her own impression or if things were forced, seen by her in a different, we all have, coming from a big child, a big family. My youngest, I always felt that my younger sister, that she got the best of my parents because they were more financially set. She had college paid for, she had a car, and we had to all work for that. But from her perspective, we all moved out and left her with our parents.
Right.
So each of us have a different parent. So when
that's so interesting.
Was born, right? You just have her, but then when you have a second, then you just have two, and then when you have a third, from her perspective, when I talked to her last week, she said that when my son was born, she felt that Bill changed in her feelings for her because he was his natural child. We, to this day, don't use steps and halves, and it's just children and grandchildren, and brothers and sisters, not halves and steps. Never use that word in our family.
I love that.
But they each had their own version of their childhood, and
I love that. They had different parents, was what you're saying. And it reminds me of, I've worked with some really wise people who had one-liners that I often repeat. And I worked with someone who said, their perception is their reality.
Yep.
So whenever you're talking about a story, my version is going to be different than your version because your perception is your reality.
And that's how you remember it. So
right.
It becomes your reality.
Right.
Absolutely. And even when you throw mental illness in the mix, like I struggle with anxiety and depression, and I grew up in from the outside looks like an idyllic household, supportive parents, loving community, everything a kid could ask for. But my perception of my childhood is that I don't have many memories because I was constantly in fight or flight. And you don't know what someone's perception is of their own childhood until you kind of see the effects later on.
And my daughter, my middle daughter, the mom of the kids, we have had a very challenging relationship really for the last 10, 15 years. And when we talked last week, she shared that she didn't feel loved and that all these things. And I said, I'm sorry if you ever felt like that. And I said, but since I've been out of jail and working on myself, I said, I'm living out my amends to you through your children. And I said, this thing we've been doing for your boys for the last 3 years is for you.
Wow.
Not for your husband. That's hard to love. But for you, because someday I want you to parent your children again. And we have kept them from the foster system.
Yep.
They would have been gone and adopted. And
wow.
And we were told by many people we should have given up the boys to the foster system for our own mental health, for our own physical health, our financial well-being. We've taken a lot of hits. We've been to court a lot of times. It's CPS has been called. It's very challenging.
Maybe this is a good time to bring up your experience with kinship care with 518. So Cameron is your family advocate, right? We love Cameron. So what was kind of your first experience? Was Cameron the first person you spoke to?
She's the only person she was. So I remember I was still working at my old job in Salem when I got a phone call from the social worker. She said, I passed off your name to a kinship navigator. I was like, what's kinship and what's a navigator? And I realized that we were in kinship foster. And so I started looking it up and I'd seen Patrick Henry in the past drive at the winter. So I didn't know what it was.
Because we were Patrick Henry Family Services at the time.
I'm sorry, yes, you were.
No, you're good. That was just for people listening, just to clarify.
Sure. And she said she had some things she could offer, and we came to support groups, and then we heard about all these classes, and even now we need it. But back then we were struggling so hard with what to do and how to help and how do we survive, because it was in fight or flight at that point.
Because how long had you had the boys at that point?
6 or 8 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe 6 weeks. And because I kept on waiting, because she kept on saying, well, I'll pass on you. We got the boys right before Christmas. So it was a very challenging time. It was December 8th. So then you had Christmas and New Year's. And then I think by the end of January, early February, we heard from Cameron. And then I think by that summer we were taking one of the trauma-informed classes. And we took the circle of parenting classes and so many different. We started coming to the support groups and realizing there are other people out there just like us. Well, we are unique in that we are an ex-husband and an ex-wife. Because I always tell people, I said, yeah, but we're divorced. Because people say, oh, your husband? I was like, no, he's my ex-husband. And it just makes it just...
You're Veronica and Bill.
Yeah, still.
And, the fact that we're still here. 3 years later. It's almost 3 years.
What was it like to get to talk to people who are in a kinship situation like you guys are? Just to know that there were other people out there like us you don't feel alone. You know, if you could use the comparison of the Titanic and the ship going down and you're in a rowboat by yourself, Molly Malone, she was pulling people in the boat with her. And I felt like we were in the boat alone. And then once we found out there were other people out there, I was like, wow, there's other people. Come in my boat with me. We could row together. That's cool.
And even though you're in it alone in the middle of the night if the baby was crying or if one of them wakes up and sometimes Bill would take one to bed and I would take one to bed because and there's people out there doing it alone. And Bill and I have talked about, early on we talked about separating and I would take the boys and what would that look like? Or, but we know that we do this together so much better. And that's what
that's so special.
Yes.
With kinship, that you are not alone. And Bill and I are not alone. And that we do have each other in ways that it's so unique. It's very hard to comprehend some days that we've made it this far. And I was talking over with him this morning as I'm doing that podcast, and I'm not doing it. I think it was Cameron who first talked to me about doing the impact event. And she said, will Bill be there? I said, she said, will Bill talk? I said, no, Bill won't talk. I said, but we'll come and support me. And when this first happened, I told Bill I would need my, I still do Celebrate Recovery. I still do meetings every week. And I said, I need that, and I need I haven't volunteered in the jail lately with the jail ministry that I'm involved with, but I'd like to get to that again. But the boys need so much right now, and so those things help feed my soul. So because I pour so much into them, I need to pour back into me.
Absolutely.
So, but this helps. You know, talking about it. I'm a talker, as you can tell.
I love it.
So
I love talkers. I'm a listener, so it's perfect.
And Bill's a listener.
Perfect.
But we could talk about politics, and there's not much we don't talk about. That's probably been our saving grace. We can talk about anything.
That's
Mike's
amazing.
always a stickler. I think that's what ruined our marriage was finances and things. But we're still working through that. We'll probably work through that until we're, not on this earth anymore.
Yeah.
I'm learning from you. I'm sure I had a bias towards kinship care versus traditional foster care. And I think I'm learning from hearing your story in real time that kinship is probably the best alternative or the better alternative, but it may not be easier.
It's not easy for anyone who takes on a child who comes from hard places.
Yeah.
And that's, what was the class we took? That was a quote I tried to remember, but you need to meet the kid where he's at. And for the foster parents who take on children from hard places, they're my heroes because they're taking on, they don't know where these kids are coming from. We know as kinship what they've been through to a degree, because there's a lot that probably happened to my grandchildren that my daughter and her husband haven't shared with us. There's a lot we do know, but for as much as we don't know. So kinship foster was new to us. These agencies, kinship care, kinship navigation, we've learned so much as much as everyone else, as you have learned. So it's a constant renewal of what's next and how do we handle this next thing. And as the boys get older, we'll handle more things. And I've always said, if we're, 3 years ago, I said, I'm not doing homework. I didn't like doing homework 3 years ago.
Oh, yes, you will.
I was, so Bill and I were great back then where he did the math and science, and I did the social studies and the English. So
there you go.
Even now, just think about doing new math or old math or any math that just scares the, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, letters and, reading.
That stays relatively constant. Right?
Yes. So here we are repeating, I always say God has a funny sense of humor. So,
sure does.
Really, he does. I had planned on, I turned 60 back in 2022. December, so it was a year in, and I planned on going to Ireland for my, from O'Reilly and McGee on both sides of my family. There's a lot of Irish there, but because of life changing, I couldn't go. And my older daughter Megan threw a surprise party. How she did it, but it was all Ireland themed. She baked me an Irish cake, and everyone were green, and it was just a little taste of So life is definitely different through this kinship foster, care we're in, but we wouldn't change it. If we can go back 3 years ago, I wouldn't change it. If it meant keeping those boys from foster care, I would do it again. Every day, my decision would never change. When people said we need to, give the boys up, what does that look like? Who's going to take them? Are we going to, we're still going to be able to be in their lives? What does that look like? And even Bill and I talked, what's the best thing for the boys at this time? And back then, we are the best thing. In absence of their parents, no one else stepped up and said, hey, we want the boys, so we are here. And just like different people in our group, whether you're an aunt or a cousin, or there's great-grandparents who are raising great-grandchildren, it's not just grandparents. And even though there's, I think, 8 million of us in the country, the last time I belonged to a grandparents group on Facebook, there's a lot of us out there who are doing this. And generationally, is it drugs? Is it mental health? Is it just they get their grandchildren because their child has died? And so many reasons why you have kinship. And I'm so grateful that there is something called kinship. And I'm grateful for, 518 that they were there and still there. My mom passed away 15, 16 years ago of a stroke, and she begged me when she was alive never to put her in a nursing home. And she had her second stroke within days, and she was there, but she wasn't. She was being kept alive by machines. So it was my gift to her to bring her home. I was her hospice nurse for that however long she was home. And I always said it was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was also the most beautiful until now.
Wow.
These boys are the hardest thing I've ever done. To hold boundaries with a 3-year-old who is but grandma, but when you have to say no and be, well, I'm sorry, you can't do that. You can't, no, we can't go there. It's hard.
Yes.
But also most beautiful. To keep them safe and to love them and if their parents get them back. If and when. It's hard.
Wow.
And it couldn't be done without kinship care and 518 and Jesus.
Is there anything that we haven't asked you that you would like to share?
Just ask for help. It's out there. Find it. Ask. Find me. Find anybody. Help is out there. Don't ever give up. Even if it's darkest, don't give up.
Amazing. I feel like coming from you with all the experiences, all the obstacles that you've worked through and are still overcoming, that'll mean a lot to people.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks
It's been a joy
for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Mended Futures Podcast, recorded at the corporate offices of 518 Family Services in Lynchburg, Virginia. The hosts of this podcast are Taylor Melvin and Allison Jordan, produced by Liam Chafin, Zoli Jugar, Sue England, Taylor Melvin, and Allison Jordan, and the executive producers are Robert Day and Claudia Fletcher.